What's up y'all, and welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, hello and welcome. In today's video, we are going to be chatting about neutral eyeshadow palettes. Super sexy, I know, but listen, I adore a neutral eyeshadow palette. As much as I love color, there's something about a neutral that is just classic, timeless, effortless. It looks good on everybody across the board, no matter what your skin tone is, and neutrals have been having a moment lately. We've always had neutrals, it's nothing new or innovative, but we've definitely seen an uptick in trend as of late, and I'm not just talking about mainstream brands, I'm talking about indie brands as well. It seems like everybody is throwing neutral or neutral leaning palettes our way, and it got me to thinking, which ones are my favorite and which ones would I recommend? So I went ahead and went through my collection, pulled out every single neutral eyeshadow palette that I have that is still currently available, and thought it would be fun to go through them with y'all and let you know what my thoughts are about the formula, the color story, and which ones I would recommend based on your makeup preferences and your lifestyle. All right, y'all, we've got quite a few palettes to get through, so I'm just gonna kind of go ahead and jump into this in no particular order. This is not a ranking or anything like that, but I will let you know which ones are my absolute favorites. And as always, every single palette will be listed and linked down below in the description box, as well as everything on my face. So per usual, if you're ever curious about anything that I use in any of my videos, always check the description box. I squeeze as much information as I possibly can into that tiny little space. But let's go ahead and kick this off with Natasha Denona, because I feel like I have quite a bit from her, and she's kind of a well-known go-to neutral brand. So starting with the Glam palette, this is one of her midi palettes. It's the first one I ever actually got from Natasha Denona, and this is going to be your cool tone neutral palette. This one is beautiful. The formula in here is really nice. The shimmers in here are a little bit more on the subtle side, still beautiful, still smooth, very easy to work with, very mature lid friendly. This one is not a favorite of mine because these are not the tones that I gravitate towards. If I'm gonna go for cool tones, I tend to go more towards like the pinky mauve side of things versus like the gray side of things, if that makes any sense. But if this is your color story, this is what you gravitate towards, this is a really beautiful palette, and I do really enjoy playing with it. But keep in mind, this is a little bit of her older formula. This palette is, I can't think how many years old it is at this point. So while it is still really nice, it is really good quality, it's not quite up there with her newer palettes that we're going to discuss in just a minute. Next up, we have the I Need a Nude palette, and this one is absolutely gorgeous. This is one of my favorites as far as neutral palettes from Natasha Denona goes. This is more cool tone leaning. This is what I gravitate towards whenever I'm going for a neutral look. The formula in here is beautiful. Again, it's going to be kind of the same song and dance with all of the Natasha Denona palettes. The formula is beautiful. It's easy to work with. It's buildable in pigmentation, very mature lid friendly. I don't experience fallout, creasing, or skipping, patching, anything like that. I drew a little bit of a blank. And the shimmers in here are definitely elevated. They are more on her sparkly side. She's got lots of different formulas in this palette as well. We've got some deeper, more opaque sparkles in here. We've got some more topper-esque ones in here, and we've even got some that are a little bit more on the satin side. I personally love this palette, but again, it comes down to a color story preference. All right, the Midi Xenon palette. This one got a lot of mixed reviews from everybody when this one came out last year, and I completely understand why, because it's very flat. You kind of want a couple pops of colors in here. I get it. And this one does have a little bit of a blue undertone. This one does have a little bit of a pink undertone. I know not everybody sees it. I absolutely see it. And while this isn't a color story that I wear very often, I still enjoy having it in my collection because this is really the only palette that I have in my collection with these kind of tones in it. But with that being said, it is very repetitive, it's very redundant. I do think this was a little unnecessary. She does have a mini version of that palette, so if this is a color story that you're gravitating towards, me personally, I would recommend going towards the midi version. Those are 5pan palettes. I do have a couple of them that we're going to chat about in just a second, but that's a 5pan palette, and it's going to give you your basic black, white, gray, couple of shimmers. It's going to be everything you need. But if this calls your name and say you use these colors every single day and you love every single shade in here, again, it's the good Natasha Denona formula. You wouldn't be disappointed in it. It's going to be very user friendly, very easy to blend, color buildup, yada yada, all the things that we've already discussed. And this is a really nice palette. So not going to be for everybody, but it is definitely a more neutral leaning palette. Our last midi palette from Natasha Denona is going to be the Golden palette. This is her most recent midi palette that she came out with, which was not too long ago, I think a couple months at this point, but this is another one of my absolute favorites. I like the tones in here. It is very neutral when it comes to the mattes, and then you have more of the golden and champagne shimmers in here, which I really love with a neutral eye. I feel like it complements my skin tone, it complements my eyes, and these are the other sort of tones that I reach for if I'm going for a neutral. Again, the formula is beautiful, it's user friendly, easy to work with. The shimmers in here are really beautiful. They're not quite up there with the ones in the I Need a Nude palette, but they are still very beautiful. They're a little bit more elevated from some of her other palettes that we've seen in the past, and I absolutely love this one. So like I said, when it comes to Natasha Denona, you're not going to be disappointed with the formula across the board. It really just comes down to which color story you want. She has other ones as well. She has some all matte palettes. She has some colorful palettes. It's really just kind of comes down to your makeup preferences. But let's talk about a couple of her mini palettes that I have right here. I only pulled 3 of them because these were the 3 that I felt pulled the most neutral in my collection, and these are also some of my favorites. So the first one that we have is the mini Biba palette. This is definitely going to be more on the warm tone side. You get 3 mattes, 2 shimmers. These are a little bit more subdued as far as sparkle go with her shimmers, but it's still a beautiful formula. The next one that we have is the mini Starlit palette. This one is going to be a little bit more on the neutral side as well, but it does have a slight cool undertone to it depending on your skin tone. So for like me, these 2 shades pull a little bit more on the mauve side, but I've seen it on other people who have more warm tone or olive leaning skin, and these pull more neutral. So another thing to kind of keep in mind whenever you're shopping for a neutral eyeshadow, your undertone plays a key role in how shades are going to pull on you. But again, I really love this one. I think it's beautiful. The shimmers in here are a little bit more elevated than the shimmers in here. You are going to get a little bit more sparkle and pizzazz out of these ones. And then the last one that I have is her newest palette. This is the mini Rose palette, and this one is going to be more of those rose tones. Very beautiful. You get 3 mattes, 2 shimmers. This is another one of my favorites as well. I really love all 3 of these minis, but I think if I had to choose one, this is the one that I would go for. I feel like I can get one beautiful cohesive look out of here. It's very user friendly. They blend out really nicely. The shimmers in here are both on the subdued side and the super sparkly side. So this one's going to give you a little bit more of that topper sparkle to it, and this one's going to give you a little bit more of just kind of that downgraded shimmer. Not quite a satin, but it's not a full-on shifty reflective sparkle either, but still a very beautiful palette. I love and adore Natasha Denona. I recommend any of her palettes. Up next we have Patrick Ta. I only have one of his Major Dimension palettes, but he does currently have 3 on the market as of this moment. He has his Major Dimension Volume 1 palette, which is going to be more of your neutral shades. It comes with 5 mattes, 5 shimmers, and 2 cream shadows. And then he also has his most recent one, which is going to be Major Dimension Volume 3, I believe, and that is an all matte palette. But I have Major Dimension Volume 2, and it's no surprise why. This is going to be more of your mauve leaning shades. This is the one that I currently have on my lids right now. I have these 4 in my crease, outer corner, lower lash line, all of that blended together. And then I have this one all over my lid and a little bit in my inner corner. This is a beautiful formula. I do really enjoy it. You get 5 mattes, 5 shimmers, and then you have the 2 creams over here. I like to use those as liners, but I've heard that you can use them as eyeshadow bases as well. I have really oily eyelids, and these do seem a little bit more on like the creamy side, so I don't think they would work that way for me. This is still a newer palette in my collection. I have played with every single shade, but I'm still kind of getting to know it a little bit, but I wanted to mention it because I know these palettes are very popular. Now, while I do like this palette, the caveat to that is These three shimmer shades right here I find to be a little bit more on the chunky and drier side. So if you're not careful with how you apply them, they can emphasize texture on your lids, especially if you have more mature lids. These two over here are a lot smoother. They are a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? They're more, I can't think of the word. Oh, hold on. They're more translucent in their base, so they go on the eye a little bit easier. They're more flattering. They still have a nice reflection to them, but they're not going to be nearly as reflective and shiny as these over here. So that's my biggest qualm with these, is I'm not the biggest fan of his shimmers in here. So if you're looking for a really good all matte palette, I do think his matte formula is really nice, and that might be one to look into. But if you're not concerned about emphasizing texture or anything like that, this is a beautiful palette. I have both of the Makeup by Mario Master Mattes palettes. I had the original one that he came out with a few years ago at this point, and then I have his most recent launch, which is the Neutrals palette, and this one he came out with earlier this year. These are really nice. I do like the formula in both of them. It's not my favorite formula, but it is a really nice one. I see why a lot of people like it. The first one that we have is the Master Mattes palette. This is his original one that he came out with. This is going to be very neutral leaning. You do have a couple pops of warm tones in here as well, but it's going to be all matte. So if you are somebody who likes an all matte look, maybe you want to have just one neutral leaning all matte palette and just have some sparkles here and there from other palettes, maybe some singles, things like that. This is a really nice formula. I do think there's other ones on the market that are just as good, if not better, at a lower price point. But if you're somebody who wants to be able to walk into a Sephora and grab it off the shelf, this is a really nice formula. I don't think you'd be disappointed in it. This one is actually my favorite of the two, but then he also has the Master Mattes, the Neutrals palette, and this one is going to be more neutral and cool leaning. It does have a lot of lighter shades in this one. I don't feel like you get quite as much depth, but again, the formula in here is really nice. It's user friendly. It's easy to work with. I don't experience patching or skipping, fallout, anything like that with either one of these, and they are really good essential palettes. From Skin by Kim, we have the Classic Mattes palette. This one launched earlier this year when she relaunched her makeup brand, and it was one of the first products that she released, and I actually really enjoyed this. I'm not a big fan of all matte looks or all matte palettes, and yes, this color story looks very familiar. We just saw it from Makeup by Mario, but I personally think this formula is just a little bit more elevated. I find it a little bit creamier, a little bit easier to work with, and it's at the same price point, so it really just kind of comes down to, do you want to be able to walk into your local Sephora and pick this one up, or do you want to order this one online? The only thing that I don't like about this is the fact that it does come in cardboard packaging. I don't have an issue with cardboard packaging, but I think the price point is a little much for something that comes in cardboard packaging. Does that make sense? If I'm going to spend this kind of money on an all matte palette, I want it to come in a little bit nicer, more luxurious, heavier packaging, because mattes are not expensive to make and cardboard packaging isn't expensive to make either. So it's just kind of a thing. But nevertheless, the formula in here is really, really nice. So if I had to choose between this one and the Makeup by Mario Master Mattes palette, let me show you a side by side. I personally would go for the Skin by Kim. So you can see it's almost the exact same color story. You do have a little bit of tonal difference in this one versus this one, but like I said, personally, this is the one that I would go for. Both of them are a beautiful formula. I don't think you would be disappointed in either one. It really just comes down to preference with those two. All right, let's move on to the more affordable end of the spectrum for just a minute, because I want to talk about the ColourPop Going Coconuts palette. This is one of my absolute favorite neutral palettes in my collection. This is a staple. I would 100% rebuy this one if it went bad, it broke, I lost it, used it up, whatever the case may be. This is just a very simple, user-friendly palette. You've got a good selection of mattes in here. You can definitely take it a little bit deeper. You can keep it nice and light and airy. I like the shimmers in here. This one in the middle is so sparkly and reflective. I do think it's leaning a little bit on the like pressed glitter side of things, but it looks beautiful on the lid. It doesn't emphasize texture or anything like that. this is a beautiful palette, and it's one I highly recommend if you're looking for just a good everyday neutral palette, whether you want to break the bank or not. This doesn't even come down to it's good for the money. This is just a really good palette. Up next, we have the Tartelette in Bloom palette from Tarte. This is an OG palette. I don't even know how many years this one has been around at this point. This is actually the second one that I have ever owned. It's just a good classic palette. I hit pan in a lot of the different shades. Absolutely loved it so much that I went out and bought another one, and you can see I haven't got nearly as much use out of this one as I had my previous one, but I do have a larger collection now. But nevertheless, this is still a really good palette. If you like the Going Coconuts palette but you want a little bit more variety, this is going to be like the elevated older sister version of that one. So still very neutral, still very simple, but you're gonna have more color variety in here. The mattes are very creamy, they are easy to work with, they are buildable in pigmentation. I don't get patching, skipping, fallout, anything like that. I don't get any creasing, and I like the way that this palette is set up because I feel like it's very user friendly. You can go across each row and create one cohesive look. You can absolutely bounce around and do whatever you want, but you've got your true cool tone neutrals, your true neutrals, and your more warm tone mauvey leaning neutrals. So you have a lot more variety in this one. I enjoy this palette. I still think it's beautiful, and like I said, it is one that I still recommend to a lot of people. I have these two palettes from Viseart. These are the two most neutral leaning ones that I have in my collection. I have others, but those are a little bit more on the colorful side. But Viseart is another one of those brands that it just comes down to your color story preference. I don't think you'd be disappointed with any of them. They have a beautiful formula. It's definitely on the softer side. It's a little bit more elevated, sophisticated, almost along the lines of like a luxury eyeshadow, but it has a little bit more punch to it. So if the other ones that we talked about are going to be a little bit too pigmented, a little bit more than what you're looking for, this is a really good formula. The shimmers in here are a little bit more on the subdued side. They still have a nice sparkle to them, but they're going to be softer. They're going to be a little bit more flattering for mature eyelids. They don't crease, they don't emphasize texture. I've never experienced any issues with any of my Viseart eyeshadows, but these are the two that I have. So the first one that I have is probably my most used Viseart one, and it's the first one that I ever got. This is the Petite Pro Solstice palette. I'm probably butchering the names of both of these, but this one is very neutral, a little bit more on that warm tone side. You get 4 mattes, 2 true shimmers, a satin, and then this really pretty like translucent base topper pink shade, your little pop of color. This looks beautiful on the inner corner, kind of popped in the middle of an eye look. I really enjoy this one. Whenever I do travel, which is not a lot, this is the palette that I tend to take with me just because it's easy. I don't really have to think about it. It's nice and tiny, compact, and I really enjoy the formula of this one. The other one that I have, I'm not really going to even try to pronounce the name. I will pop it up on the screen, but this one is going to be a little bit deeper in depth. It's still got a lot of warmth to it, but it's a little bit more on like that orangey red side of the warmth, and you do have some cool tones down here. This one is also going to be a little bit more shimmer heavy. So if you want just a couple of mattes and you want more variety with your shimmers, this is a really good one to go to as well. I really enjoy this one. I like the color selection, I like the tones, I like the shimmers in here. This is another beautiful one. Again, like I said, Viseart is just a good brand. They have lots and lots and lots of neutral eyeshadow palettes, but they also have a lot of color as well. So if you're somebody who struggles with just things being a little bit too pigmented, maybe it's a little bit too much, and you want something more subdued at a really good price point, Viseart's a good brand to go for. From Anastasia Beverly Hills, we have the Soft Glam 2 palette. This is a smaller, more curated version of the original Soft Glam. I don't have that one anymore. I got rid of it, but I kept this one because there's something about the color story that I really like. I don't know exactly what it is. I have these tones in other palettes. I have better formulas than this in my collection, but for some reason, I can't bring myself to get rid of it. I find the mattes in here to be they're not the easiest to work with. They're not hard to work with. Like, I don't get patching or skipping. I just have to build up a little bit more, and I have to work a little bit harder to blend them out. But the two shimmers in here are really nice. I like the color selection. I do think this is a good palette, but if you're somebody who is just starting out and you want it to be a little bit more fuss-free, I don't know if this is one that I would absolutely recommend. And it's not one that I would be heartbroken if it shattered, if it went bad, if I lost it, anything like that. Like, I wouldn't run out and repurchase purchase it, but for some reason I just can't seem to bring myself to get rid of it. Alright, we have the only larger Huda Beauty palette that I have in my collection. This is the Empowered palette, and I believe this one came out 2 years ago for holiday, but I recently got this one as a birthday present along with the one from Patrick Ta and another one that we're going to talk about in just a minute. But I have used it, I have gotten to know it, and I do enjoy it, but I don't know if I'm as crazy about it as a lot of people are. So the mattes in here are really nice. I find them easy to work with. They're very creamy. My issue comes down to this shade right here, this really interesting like balmy petri dish shade that we have going on right here. It does swatch out really pretty, but if you have really oily eyelids like I do, I think this could be a disaster on the lid, and it's just not something I'm really fond of. She also has 2 cream shades in this one, very similar to the ones in Patrick Ta, but I found the ones in the Patrick Ta palette to be a little bit easier to work with. So with those aside, I think the palette's beautiful. I like the formula in here. I like the colors in here. This is definitely like half warm, half cool tone, but it's also not going to be for everybody. I find that these shimmers up here, and which other one was it? I think it was this one right here, are very chunky. They can be very messy when you go to pick them up, and for me, they emphasize texture on my lid. They don't crease or anything like that, but I do get fallout as well, and they are very reflective. They're very pretty, but I just have to be extra careful when I go in with them and go in super lightly handed, and like I said, when you dig into them, you get a lot of crumbly, fallout, chunky mess, which some people absolutely love. For me, it's not my favorite. I prefer a smoother, less textured shimmer on my lid, and the rest of these are that. So like this one, and then this one right here are a lot smoother than those other 3. So it's kind of a give and take, a little half and half with this palette. So I'm not mad about this palette. I don't absolutely hate it, but I don't think it's one that I would recommend for everybody. So if you maybe have younger lids, maybe you like a little bit more of that chunkiness to it, you like to experiment with different textures, things like that, this could be a really good palette. But if you want something that's going to be very user-friendly, very effortless, maybe you have more mature lids, I don't think this is going to be a go-to for you. All right, moving on to our first indie brands of the video. We have 2 palettes from Lunar Beauty, and both of these are beautiful. The formula is fantastic. The mattes are creamy. They are user-friendly. They're pigmented without being over the top, but you can still build them up at the same time. I don't experience any creasing, any patching, skipping, fallout, anything like that. The shades last all day on my eyes, and this is a fantastic formula. His shimmers are really nice as well. But let's go through both of these. So the first one that we have is the Nude Prism palette, and this is another one that is still newer to me. I have gotten quite a bit of use out of this one, and I absolutely love it. This is a perfect neutral palette. If you want just one neutral palette in your collection that's gonna touch pretty much across the board with everything except for like your true warm tones, this is a beautiful palette. I find the mattes, like I said, very easy to use. I love the array of shimmers in here. You have lots of different undertones to them. None of them are super dark. You do have this lighter one right here that you can pop in your inner corner, but I like the versatility of this palette. I like the layout of this palette. I like the quality of this palette. I think it's absolutely beautiful. This one is hyped for a reason. It took me a really long time to finally get this one. I never picked it up. It was actually a gift for me, but I'm so happy that I did because it is a beautiful formula. Like I said, very user-friendly, easy to use. But if you want this formula, this consistency, this quality, but maybe you want something a little bit more adventurous but still on that neutral side, the Full Fantasy palette in collaboration with Laura Lee and Lunar Beauty, this one is still currently available. This one is beautiful as well. So you still have a lot of those same basic neutrals in here, but you're getting into a little bit more of your neutrals with a twist in this palette. So you have some of your greens down here. I personally find the more muted, like earthy tone greens to be a neutral, because in like the fashion world, the design world, green is a neutral, and I feel that same way when it comes to eyeshadow. Now when you start to get into like the brighter, punchier neon greens, forest greens, things like that, it can definitely be color, but these I find to be, like I said, a little bit more neutral. But then you also have your couple pops of purples over here as well. You have this really nice black down here, and you have an array of sort of colorful leaning shimmers as well. So this one is a really good one if you want neutrals but you want just a little bit of a pop of color. This is a really good option. From Nomad Cosmetics, we have the Air Travel palettes. There's actually 4 of these, but the 4th one is very green leaning and not like a neutral green leaning, so we're just gonna focus on these 3. But up first, we have my favorite one, which is the original Air Travel palette. This is just a beautiful, basic, stable, neutral palette. You have 3 mattes, 3 shimmers. The shimmer formula in here is really nice. It's not going to be super reflective. It's not gonna have any flips or anything like that to it, but it does look very beautiful on the eye. They are smooth, easy to apply. I don't get creasing with these, and the mattes in here are very user-friendly as well. They are pigmented, but they also blend out really nicely, so it's not the kind of pigmentation where once you have it on your eye, that's kind of it. They're very easy to work with. The only thing that I wish this palette had was this was a little bit lighter. I feel like if it was, it would work well for more people across the skin tone. I don't even know what I'm trying to say anymore. I feel like it would work better for more skin tones across the board, because for me personally, I want something lighter. I can bring it in, but just something to kind of think about if you're looking for that one and done stable neutral palette. Next, we have the Abu Dhabi Zayed AUH palette, and this one is going to be your warm tones. This is my second favorite one out of the 3 that we're talking about, and I really enjoy this one. Like I said, it's very warm tone leaning, but in this one you get 4 mattes and 2 shimmers, and you also get that lighter matte shade that we talked about. So for me, I get a lot more variety with this one. I do wish that one of these had been a little bit darker. I feel like this palette is very mid-tone, but I still enjoy the looks that I create with it, and I still find it to be the same formula as in this one and across the board with the other Nomad palettes that I have in my collection. And the last one that we have is going to be the Oslo Garder Moen OSL palette. This is going to be very cool tone. Again, these are not the tones that I reach for, but this is a really nice palette. I think this one has the best variety when it comes to mattes. It goes from really light to really dark. You've got 2 midtones in here. You've got 2 shimmers. This is a beautiful palette if these are your tones. Like I said, they're not mine, but the quality is still really good in here. I experienced the same kind of formula with this one as I do with the other ones. No creasing, no fallout, no patching, skipping. I don't have any issues building up the pigmentation or blending them out. So these are really good palettes. They're from an indie brand and they are super affordable. All right, so let's move on to our neutrals with a twist. These are going to be our palettes that have a little bit of a pop of color in them, but they're still going to be more on the neutral side. So if you love your colorful makeup, these are 100% going to be a neutral palette for you. But if you love your neutrals, the ones that we've already talked about, these are going to be a little bit more of a step into color for you. But let's go ahead and continue on with Nomad since we're already on that train anyway. So up first we have the Oakcha Safari palette, and this one is absolutely beautiful. It has lots of earthy tones in it. You've got your warm tone neutrals, your cool tone neutrals. You've got these pops of greens in here. The matte formula is really good, very user friendly. I don't have any issues with patching, skipping, fallout. There is a little bit of kick up in the pan, but it doesn't translate to the lid. Now my only issue with this palette is that the shimmers in here are a little harder pressed. So you do need to push down a little bit harder and work a little bit harder to pick them up with your finger. And if you're somebody who likes to use a brush to apply your shimmers, you might have a little bit of a harder time picking these up. So not my favorite shimmer formula from the brand. I do really like the mattes from this one, but I wanted more from the shimmers. But let's move on to our next Nomad Cosmetics palette, and this one I almost didn't include because it is sold out on the website, but the brand is bringing it back along with another spooky season palette come next month in September. But this is the Ghost Town USA palette that they came out with last fall, and this one is going to be your cool tone neutral palette. So what I love about this one is you have these browns over here, you have these kind of blue, green, teal shades in the middle, and then then you have these true like earthy green tones over here. The shimmers in this one are really, really good. They're nice and reflective. They're easy to pick up. They look beautiful on the lid. They are smooth. They're not chunky. They don't emphasize texture. I don't have creasing or fallout or anything like that with this palette. And again, it's the same beautiful matte formula that I've talked about with the rest of the Nomad palettes thus far in this video, but this is a really good one. So if you've been eyeing it and you know it's sold out on the website, it's coming back at the beginning of September. I think you can go onto their website and sign up for emails. I know they update you on Instagram and things like that, but they are bringing that one back. Up next from Jolie Beauty, we have the Till Death palette, and this is supposed to be like a modern twist on a bridal palette. So something a little bit more subdued for the colorful lover, but it's still going to be colorful for your matte lover. But I love this palette. You've got cool tones, you've got warm tones, you've got your browns, you've got your grays, you've got your greens, your mauves, a little bit of everything. It is a lot bigger of a palette, but you do get a really good variety in here. I like the matte formula. You do get satins in here. I like a satin formula. I know a lot of people don't, so I want to let you know that. But you don't get any pressed glitters in here either, but you do get lots of varieties when it comes to the shimmers. But again, I don't experience any issues with this formula. I love this palette. The mattes are nice and creamy. They're pigmented. They're buildable. They're blendable. I don't get any patching, skipping, fallout, anything like that. And the same goes with the shimmers. I don't experience any issues with them either. This one is a little bit more on the colorful side. It's probably the most colorful one that we're going to talk about, but I wanted to bring it up in case you are that person who absolutely loves color and you want something a little bit more subdued and a little bit more on the neutral side. From Cosmic Beauty, aka Cosmic Brushes, I'm not really sure what their name is anymore at this point, but we're gonna go with Cosmic Beauty. This is the Neutrals palette. They also came out with a Cool Trolls palette as well, but I find that one to be a little bit more on the colorful side than this one. But this one is another one of those neutrals with a twist. You have all of your neutral shades up at the top, but then you have your more greens, your more purple shades, and you have lots of different pops of colors when it comes to the shimmers. Cosmic Beauty has a beautiful, very affordable formula. Their mattes are super easy to work with, very user-friendly, very creamy, very buildable in pigmentation. They last all day. I don't experience any issues with any of them, but their shimmers are so beautiful. They are very reflective, very flippy, very beautiful. They don't have sparkles in them or anything like that. They are nice and smooth and they go on very easily on the lid. You've got multi-chromes, you've got duochromes, you have your basic shimmers in here as well. This is a beautiful palette and this is a very affordable price point. Cosmic Beauty is a UK indie brand, so if you're over here in the United States, it is going to take a little bit longer to you and there is a shipping fee, but the formula is 100% worth it in my opinion. From Unearthly Cosmetics, we have the Sorceress Smoke palette, and this is very neutral leaning for the brand. They are known for their wild color stories, bright, vibrant. Things are a little bit different, but very beautiful. But this one is very neutral leaning. You have your cool tone browns, your warm tone browns, you've got your black, this really pretty like dusty pinky shade that is very neutral leaning when you pair it with this brown over here, and you've got your greens. The mattes in here are very pigmented, so a little bit goes a long way. I wouldn't suggest this if you are just getting into color or if you're just getting into eyeshadow, and I probably also wouldn't suggest this for more mature lids either, just because it can be a little bit harsh and a little bit harder to work with if you're not used to a super pigmented formula. But the shimmers in here are beautiful. They are shifty, they are shiny, they are sparkly, they are very reflective on the lid, but they're also very smooth, and I don't find that they emphasize texture. So this is a beautiful palette. I do really enjoy it, but again, it's not for everybody. So, you know, if you're somebody who likes to experiment, maybe you've got a lot more experience with eyeshadow, this is a really good one and I do really enjoy it. From Fantasy Cosmetica, one of my absolute favorite indie brands, this is the Fighter palette. And again, this is their most leaning palette from their entire collection. They do lots of color, lots of fun color stories as well. But this one was a little bit of a surprise when it came out because it is very neutral leaning. Your pops of colors are going to come from your shimmers in here. Their shimmer formula is absolutely beautiful. It can be a little bit more on the flaky side, not necessarily chunky, but you are are gonna get a little bit more fallout with their shimmers. It can emphasize texture if you have a lot going on your lid. So again, it's one of those you need to proceed with caution, especially if you have more mature eyelids. But the mattes in here are really nice. It is a beautiful formula. It's easy to work with. They are not super pigmented like the ones in Unearthly, but the pigmentation is definitely there. You don't have to work really hard to get your pigmentation, but you can build up to what you want. You can fluff it out. I don't experience patching, skipping, creasing, fallout, anything like that. This is a beautiful palette, and it's actually one of my favorites from the brand. I really enjoy this one. All right, we're just about at the end of this, but I do have 3 honorable mention palettes sitting here in front of me. And I say honorable mention because these are palettes that are still new to me and I'm still testing out. So I haven't gotten to every single shade yet, but I feel comfortable enough kind of mentioning them in here, but I don't quite have my final thoughts together. But let's go ahead and start with the Precious Metals palette from ColourPop. This is beautiful. This is cool tones, this is warm tones, but you've got your coppers, your reds, your oranges, and then you have like your silvers, your grays, and your taupes in here. You've got a little bit of everything. The variety is really nice. The matte formula is fantastic. It's the same matte formula that I talked about in the Going Coconuts palette that we talked about at the beginning of the video, and I like the shimmers in here as well. I find them to be very smooth, very easy to use. They're not going to be flippy or super sparkly or anything like that, but they do have a nice reflection to them, and across the board I just find this to be a really nice staple palette. If you want a little bit of everything, maybe you don't know if you like cool tones or warm tones, or if you like more coppers or golds or taupes or silvers or whatever, this is a really good one to start with. I've enjoyed the formula so far, and this one makes me excited for the brand because this is a really good formula. From Natasha Cosmetics, we have the Barely Basics palette. I love and adore this palette. There's only like 2 shades in here that I haven't gotten to yet, but so far I have really enjoyed playing with this. The matte formula from Natasha Cosmetics is absolutely gorgeous. This is probably one of my favorite formulas out of all these palettes that we discussed. I just find the mattes to be the creamiest, the most user-friendly in this palette in particular. Keep in mind this is a little bit more on the colorful side. You only have 1 row of true neutrals. The rest of these are going to be your greens, your oranges, and your more mauve leaning shades. So again, it's going to be one of those that is going to be more of a neutral palette for a colorful lover. But I do still think this is a very easy to work with palette. Keep in mind these shimmers right here in the middle are a little bit more on the flakier side. They don't emphasize texture, but you do get fallout. You do get a little bit of chunkiness when you pick them up, but they are so beautifully reflective on the lid. I've really enjoyed this palette, and I felt like she needed a little spotlight moment in this video. And the last neutral palette that we have to talk about in this video is the one that started it all, the goat of all the neutral palettes. It is the Urban Decay Naked palette. This is the remastered version. I don't have the original version. I never had the original version, but this is beautiful. Is it the best formula that we've talked about so far? No, but it is a really nice user-friendly formula. There's not a whole lot of mattes in here, so if you like a more matte heavy palette, this is not going to be the one for you. It also doesn't have super reflective and sparkly shimmers in here either. It has a little bit more of like the metallic shimmers that are a little bit more on the subdued side, but I've really enjoyed the tones in here. You've got a lot of cool tones, a lot of warm tones. It is very easy to work with. I like the packaging. You do get a little brush in here, and I think this is a really good place to start if you're looking into getting into makeup. Maybe you just want a really good basic staple neutral palette, but keep in mind this is very limited edition. It will not be around forever, and I don't know if the brand will ever bring it back, but if you've had your eye on it, if you want it, go and snag it now. I really enjoyed playing with this palette, and I'm really happy to have it in my collection. Alright y'all, so that is going to complete this video. I hope y'all enjoyed it, and I hope y'all found this helpful. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. What is your favorite neutral palette? Are you not into neutrals? Is there a palette that you have in your collection that's your absolute favorite that I didn't mention? I want to know it all. Let's have that conversation. Light up that comment section, and as usual, I want to thank you all so much for watching my video and spending your time with me. It truly does mean so much to me. And if you like this video, make sure you give it a big thumbs up before you leave. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click on that notification bell so that you can be notified of all my future posts here on my channel. I do post quite a few videos every single week, and I wouldn't want you to miss one. But until my next video, have a good one. Bye.